All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first streaming edition of Meet Our Contributors, where we have, let's see, five fabulous contributors on the line, or six rather, that if I can count correctly. This series has been created as part of Kubernetes' larger mentoring initiatives. And what's better than having 6+ mentors on the same line with answering questions on demand? Today, we're going to be taking questions from the Kubernetes Slack channel for Meet Our Contributors. And if I can keep up, Twitter, hopefully, with the hashtag of K8SMOC. If anybody's out there following along, we would love to have your questions. So we'd actually also like to open up this session in the future for potential peer code reviews as well as code walkthroughs. So if anybody listening has problems that they would like a second pair of eyes on, or problems where they're getting stuck, please submit those ahead of time so we can have proper folks on the call to give a little code review session at the end. But today we actually have Ellen on the line, and we are going to do a little small outreachy interview with her to tell everybody about the outreachy program that we're involved with. But that'll be a little later. And first, we're going to go through some intros, and then we're going to get right into the questions. Cool. All right. First, I'm Paris. I work at Google. I am a special interest group lead for contributor experience and largely working with ideas for mentoring for contributor ladder growth and also first-time contributors. Nikita, why don't you go first?
Okay, so hey everyone, I'm Nikita and I'm an intern at Red Hat. A few months back, I was a Google Summer of Code intern with Kubernetes, and I work mainly with API machinery and custom resources, CRDs, and that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. And Ilya.
Hey folks, I'm Ilya, VisWorks. Worked on KubeADM in the past and have various different projects of my own where I use Client Go and other Kubernetes client library, the Go SDK essentially. And I also am currently looking at various topics in relation to like application definition and config and stuff. And generally been involved with Kubernetes since like 2014. So yeah, been around for a little while.
Awesome. We've got a wide range of experience on the call. And then Ihor from the Kubernetes Cave.
Hey everyone, my name is Ihor. I'm Ihor Duratsky. I'm a developer advocate at Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the uncommercial organization that holds Kubernetes as an open source project. At Kubernetes community, I am involved primarily as a co-lead of SIG product management. Also, I'm deeply involved into the Kubernetes release process.
Awesome. And then Aaron.
Hi, I'm I'm Aaron Krickenberger with Samsung SDS. I am co-founder and co-lead of the Kubernetes SIG testing. I'm also an active participant in SIG contributor experience, SIG architecture, SIG scalability, and I've been actively involved in the release teams since Kubernetes version 1.4. Yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. And then Ellen?
Hi, I'm with Outreachy. I'm working with SIG CLI. Right now, I am getting some experimental code, that kind of stuff. Is this even possible? And trying to make a library out of it so that more people can use it. It's been really, 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 really difficult, but it's fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome to the challenge, I'm sure. And George, you are holding us down on YouTube. Can you introduce yourself? Is that possible?
Yeah, I'm George Castro. I work at Heptio, mostly participate in SIG contributor experience and kind of do community tasks. One of the big things I'm working on this cycle is the Kubernetes contributor guide. So if you search for that in your search engine, it should pop right up. And we're in the middle of reworking that to be better. So if you're new and you want to get started, going through the instructions and telling us what needs to be fixed would be a great place to start.
Definitely. And I think all of us on this call can give any first-time contributors some places to start, especially within contributor experience, which is a great place. So let's jump into the questions. We actually have one question for Slack right now, and that's for Nikita. It's from an aspiring Google Summer of Code intern for Kubernetes, which is awesome that we're getting the word out in the student community. And they wanted some guidance on just how to start and approach the mentors that are interested in the program.
So I think here we have, I'd like to divide this question into multiple questions. So first is, how do you start contributing? Second is, when do you approach the mentors? And third is, how do you approach the mentors? So firstly, for Google Summer of Code, it says that you need to have previous contributions to the project to get selected. But honestly, you don't need to have any previous contributions. You just need to show initiative, and you can start contributing now as well. So if you're completely new to Kubernetes, go to the website, kubernetes.io, read the documentation, and absolutely, positively try the interactive tutorial, because that is going to be, that's going to teach you a lot. And play around with kubectl or kubectl or kubectl and get familiar with it. Then read the contributor guide that was mentioned just now, and go through the Kubernetes community repository and read as much as you can over there. Set up a cluster locally or however you prefer, and play around with it. Once you're comfortable with that, then reach out to the mentor. Usually I've seen that what students are doing right now is that they try to find an issue to work on by themselves, or try to think about which SIG to join, but then they fail miserably at that because they're not, Kubernetes is a huge project and you don't know which SIG to join or what issue to pick up. And well, if you don't have mentoring, then the issues can be somewhat hard to start out with. So don't jump into issues by yourself for now. If you're a Google Summer of Code student, reach out to me or anyone else who is working on that issue. And if you don't need to search for an issue. Just reach out to me and I will point you out to an issue, and I will tell you the steps that you need to do to solve that issue. So that's one important thing, that don't worry or don't get sad if you don't find an issue to work on. And so this is the when you should be contacting the mentors. About how you should be contacting, join this relevant SIG channel on Slack, and talk to the mentor and just introduce yourself, tell your name, about your previous experience with Kubernetes, or what have you done up until now? Like, have you read the documentation? Have you looked at some issues, or would you like to work on this particular project or something like that? And ask for a beginner friendly issue to work on, and I'm pretty sure someone will help you out. So that's about it. That's how you ask the mentors. And there's one point that I'd like to specify, is that once you do all of this, the most important thing is not to get demotivated, because like Ellen had previously said, that the code is like a huge spaghetti and it's super confusing. So you are going to get confused, you are going to get demotivated, you're going to feel really, really silly at times, and you're going to feel shy about asking questions. But feel free to ask questions, because everyone who works on Kubernetes knows how difficult it is to contribute to it, and no one's going to judge you even if you ask simple questions. So don't get sad, don't get demotivated, and ask questions.
George?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you.
Yeah?
Though.
Yeah.
As far as the complexity and things like that, is that because you're participating in API machinery? It's my understanding that that's pretty much the hardest thing you can choose to start on.
That could be possibly it, maybe, because I've mainly worked in API machinery, and I've seen that the projects that have been put up for Google Summer of Code are mainly API machinery. So yeah, it's going to require some mentoring on that front, but I think Ellen can touch up on the 6 CLI part of things. Okay. I guess.
Ellen, what were your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's mainly a problem of organization and having a workflow for onboarding, not necessarily code complexity, because the stuff I'm working on, the stuff that took me like months to understand, it's not complicated. It's just you look at a bunch of code, you don't even know what that code's trying to do. You don't know what that's supposed to mean or how or why. And I mean, then you're not going to make any sense of it. Doesn't matter if the code's simple or if it's if it's complex. So for me, I think it's an issue of organization and onboarding, not necessarily the code itself being hard. I might be wrong because the code I work with seems very simple to me, and maybe the code Nikita worked with was very hard. But to me, the main challenge was never the code. It was, once somebody tells me like, okay, this code is supposed to do this in such and such a way for these and those objectives, then it's clear and it's easy.
Alan, we'd like to hear some more details from you and contributor experience, if you can make that call today. If not, then a future one. We can dive into those details. And I think Aaron had something to add as well.
Yeah, I'll just, one of the problems the Kubernetes steering committee is trying to work on is making sure that there's a clear mapping between the code, the organization of the code, and the organization of the people who own it. So we're calling this like sub-projects. So for example, SIG Apps has a sub-project called the Workloads API. So if you're interested on working on anything related to daemon sets, deployments, replica sets, jobs, cron jobs, et cetera, you would go talk to the people who are running the Workloads API sub-project, which I think is Kenneth Owens. And we're working on getting this information documented on the README for SIG Apps, as well as inside of the owner's files for all of the code that's related to this. But just as an illustration of the complexity issue, so like I'm a member of the steering committee. I've been with the project since before it went 1.0, and somebody suggested that the Workloads API sub-project should include jobs and cron jobs, not just daemon sets and whatnot. And like, I literally don't know all of the places in the code base that make that up. I had to go asking around to people to find out which specific packages and which specific subdirectories are the mapping for this. Which brings me to like, I had to ask people, and like I've been with the project for a long time, and I'm very thankful that the community is generally speaking pretty responsive. If you come and talk to them as a human being, you'll get another human being to talk to. I personally find that Slack is usually the quickest way to do this. If somebody's free, they'll respond to you. But if not, or for like longer conversations that I can expect to be asynchronous, I usually find the SIGs are pretty responsive across their mailing lists too. So it's totally a problem like somebody from the Summer of Code will have, as well as somebody who's literally trying to like organize the entire project. So the complexity is sort of a little inherent in that we grew extraordinarily quickly, and that's something we all recognize.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that code-based contributions and writing code is not the only area where you can get started with contributions to Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is not only the technical open source project, it's the big open source project that covers almost all the areas where people today interacting with these systems. And for example, today I'm several years contributed to Kubernetes. At the same time, my first contribution was writing a small doc that was landed on a website. My personal experience, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer of the code, but I've been a system administrator, DevOps engineer, SRE for years. And when first time I've tried to evaluate Kubernetes as a project that can satisfy my needs, I found that some information in the documentation of the website is lacking. And it was terribly easy to write some doc for myself, submit it to the website and get it landed. And today it's available for everyone. Not only documentation, if you if you're not a programmer and if you're not looking for the code contributions, you can also run the local meetups that are, again, that are part of Kubernetes community, that are part of Kubernetes ecosystem. You can play and join their SIG release where you'll be involved in the release process. If you experience project or product manager, SIG PM is for you. So we have lots of areas of contributions to Kubernetes community where your not only programming experience will be available.
So it sounds like new contributors should have an exploration phase, essentially, and go and see what SIGs are out there, what working groups are out there. SIGs, again, are special interest groups. A question that we're getting now and one that we get frequently is which SIG, how do I know where to start with a SIG? Is there something about my personality that would lean me towards one SIG? Does anyone want to take that question?
So I mean, I'll just start off with the whole name of the SIG is the special interest group. So I would somewhat start with like, what is the area that you're interested in specifically? So like, I think CLI is a pretty great place to contribute. Personally, I use command line interfaces in anger very, very frequently. The fastest way I usually interact with something. So if I wanted to make that experience better, I would definitely join SIG CLI. I do agree that like API machinery is a little dense, but it's also like, it's sort of at the edge of how do you deal with the massive complexity of lots and lots of APIs and doing it in a really loose decoupled manner. So if you're interested in learning about that, you can go to API machinery. Now, as far as contributing, I saw the question was like, if I already know how to code in Go, you know, most of the project is written in Go. I'll put on my SIG testing hat and also speak a little bit from SIG contributor experience in that a lot of what helps this project go faster is automation that helps reduce the friction in general. So we have a large amount of bots and stuff that make sure that labels are applied consistently and that tests get run, et cetera, et cetera. And there are sort of smaller, more lightweight code bases to which you can contribute from a SIG testing perspective. And we always welcome all newcomers in SIG testing. There are also a number of hard automation problems that contributor experience is trying to shepherd. I will defer to the others for other SIGs of interest.
Yeah, I would describe this question and answer this question a bit in a more general way. So first of all, we have all the SIGs, and we have around 2,000 of SIGs in Kubernetes community, but most of them are categorized into two major, unofficial but major groups. Some of them are like mostly technical and owning some code base, and another piece is like project-wide and not owning the single code base, but is covering some specific areas in Kubernetes community. So we have multiple SIGs that are mostly touching some technical components like CKPI machinery or SIG CLI or SIG node, for example. So all these special interest groups in Kubernetes community are covering some specific technical areas. Some areas that are solving some technical questions of developing something new for Kubernetes, some new code for Kubernetes, and solving some operation experience for Kubernetes for the existing users. At the same time, a huge number of SIGs, like SIG docs that is focused on documentation, SIG contributor experience that is focused on onboarding the new contributors and making the life easier for existing contributors, SIG PM again, SIG release, SIG testing, even SIG architecture in some way. All of the SIGs are covering some, they're mostly focused on not only technical areas, not only code contributions to Kubernetes, but also to the areas that may make this project more successful, entire project.
All right, and I think you actually answered the next question, which was if we can name some SIGs that might be good starts outside of docs for beginners. So I think you just nailed that one. Did anybody have any other SIGs to add to that list? I think, George, it looks like you might have had something.
Yeah, contributor experience, like I said, the contributor guide's always looking for help. We have a bunch of documentation that teaches people things about Kubernetes, but they're all written by different people, and we're churning through that and stuff, but mostly you need to just have organizational skill. And like I'm learning a lot about how things work just by going through that. So that's a good place to start. And there's always, usually in meetings, if you sit through a SIG meeting, at some point usually SIG leads will call out, "Hey, help needed here," or sometimes if you look in the SIG's meeting notes, you might be able to glean tasks that are still not assigned to people. And I know some SIGs have what they call a backlog. So as an example, SIG cluster lifecycle, Tim just spent a while getting that backlog sorted so that it's like, here's stuff that we all want to do that isn't assigned to anybody. And I'm sure other SIGs would have to have something like that. I'm not familiar with any right off the top of my head, but it kind of helps to be like, okay, hey, people who've been here a while, what are some things on the backlog that are good places to start, I think.
And let's not forget labels.
Yeah.
There is the help wanted label that we utilize, that other projects also utilize. Is there any other labels or mechanics of GitHub that folks can look out for to jump into an issue or a problem? I guess we exhausted that answer.
That was like an Aaron question.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so I can speak to SIG testing, for example. My answer to you would be like, go look at the issues in the repo that we own. So we own the Kubernetes test info repo. There's an open issue count of something like 200. And generally speaking, if somebody isn't assigned to an issue, that means nobody's working on it. And from there, I would literally just say, like, what sounds most interesting to you? You would probably welcome help on just about anything. That answer gets a little more intimidating if you look at the Kubernetes repo, which has like over 4,000 issues, right? That's maybe where you're going to go ask a SIG more specifically, or look at the help wanted label. Although, like, I've heard some of my teammates have found the help wanted label isn't being curated as effectively as they would like. So if there's a help wanted issue that looks really cool to you, but you're not sure if it's being worked, again, I'm going to kind of keep saying this over. Feel free to like go to Slack and find the people who said they were working on it but haven't done anything lately, or the person who originally created the issue, or the SIG that happens to have their label on the issue. Go asking that channel if it's still a thing, because those things can tend to fall out of date, and it can be unclear whether or not it's strictly speaking necessary. I wanted to go back to the SIGs of worth recommending again, just because I'm looking at the SIG list again. And I think you can kind of break it down into like cluster lifecycle is a really great SIG, I think, just because it has had that backlog curation, and it also encompasses a number of sub-projects that are not specifically related to the innards of Kubernetes, but like, given a Kubernetes, how do you stand up and manage a cluster effectively, right? So Kubernetes anywhere and kops and getting rid of the horrible bash scripts that lived in the cluster subdirectory of Kubernetes are all things that fall under the purview of cluster lifecycle. Similarly, if you're interested in doing cool things on top of a Kubernetes, so you kind of don't care how the Kubernetes cluster was stood up or necessarily what its capabilities are, but you want to be able to deploy things on top of it that make management of applications easier or automating more things easier. SIG apps would probably be a great place to get and take a tour of some of the sub-projects there, like Helm for deploying applications or large sets of Kubernetes resources in the form of charts, or Compose, where how do we make it easier to onboard people from the Docker Compose world into Kubernetes applications. If you're interested in running Kubernetes in your cloud provider of choice, so you have a lot of AWS experience, or you have a lot of Azure experience, or you have a lot of Google Cloud experience, and you're motivated to ask why Kubernetes doesn't support your cloud's like awesome new feature or whatever, there's SIGs dedicated specifically to those cloud things. And so even just offering like your experience or your history as a cluster operator could be useful, and you might be able to help write some things and go to help implement some of that stuff. For example, I know like Amazon's going to be more actively participating in SIG AWS directly. So your feedback will definitely be taken into account. I'd say those are also probably the SIGs where you want to show up if you're less interested in contributing directly to the innards of Kubernetes, but are an active user of the major cloud providers' managed Kubernetes services, right? So GKE, you're probably going to go talk to SIG GCP. AKS, you're going to go want to talk to SIG Azure. EKS, you're going to want to talk to SIG AWS. And then if you are interested in the innards of Kubernetes, there's sort of like vertical SIGs that are focused specifically on some aspect, as well as the horizontal SIGs that Ihor was alluding to that sort of cover the project generally. So like SIG release, we could always use people to help out with the release of Kubernetes because there's a lot of effort that goes into keeping everything on track for a release. That doesn't necessarily involve technical contribution, but will give you a large tour of the Kubernetes code base as well as how all of the SIGs operate. If you're interested in the specific components, like SIG-Node would be a great place if you want to go talk about different container runtimes for your node of choice, or like SIG storage would be a great place to go if you're interested in getting your particular storage driver to work well with Kubernetes. So hopefully that was a little bit more detailed of an answer. Like each SIG sort of has its own thing. I would also highly recommend just like jumping in their Slack channels and looking at a meeting or two, or at least like their meeting notes, just to get a flavor of the character of that SIG. If you don't feel like you have an area of expertise, but you just kind of want to jump in someplace.
And Ilya, did you have anything to add as far as first-time contributors are concerned and finding their spot? Ilya, are you there?
I think that
yeah,
was a pretty good answer already. Yeah, not much to add. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, and then we actually have a pretty general question, so this will be fun. Why Kubernetes contribution? So why be a contributor? I would love to hear. Nikita's thoughts on that. Why Kubernetes? Why not another open source project? What landed you here?
So I was originally contributing to another organization before, and they were using Kubernetes, and I thought this thing looks cool and this is fun to use, and I already knew Go back then. And when I was looking for more projects to contribute and things to learn, and honestly, the real answer was that this is super cool. And the other answer was that there is a fantastic community surrounding it, because that was a little important to me back then, because having a community surrounding a project is helpful, because that's the reason that I'm here. Like, that's the reason I'm still contributing to Kubernetes. It's not just the code, it's the people surrounding it. So I think it's the community plus that it's super fun to work on.
Yeah, applause for the community.
Yeah.
All right, Ellen, what about you? Why Kubernetes? Why not something else? Or maybe there is something else.
Well, for me, it's because, there are many technical challenges out there, and things that are important and things that aren't as important. And I think what Kubernetes is doing, like the problem Kubernetes is trying to solve, is something I consider important, and I think it's something worth spending time on. I guess it's more of an ideological thing. It's like something I believe in, I guess. So to me, it's more like that. Of course, I was learning Go, and I started making friends learning Go, and turns out most of them are involved in Kubernetes anyway. So I was learning Kubernetes even without specifically wanting to. And the community is very mixed together, like the Go community and the Kubernetes community. So I started, I did the Kubicorn website just because I was friends with Chris and Chris Nova. And so, okay, we need a website. Okay, I'll do it. And that's how I got introduced to it. But a more in-depth response would be that I think it's a problem worth solving. So that's why I'm here.
Cheers. That's a really good answer. Ilya, what about you? Why Kubernetes contribution? Why not another language? Why this? Why now?
That's a very good question. I guess, well, before working in the space of Kubernetes and Docker and all things containers, I was in a DevOps role, doing a lot of things with config management and such things, and I just realized that the config management tools aren't really solving most of the problems that people have when it comes to deploying applications in production. And I was really amazed when Google open sourced Kubernetes and in 2014. But I was already playing around with Docker and CoreOS at the time, and I really got quite excited about Kubernetes, and then I started looking at it, and the first problems that I saw in Kubernetes were to do with cluster bootstrap. It was all like a complete mess. So that's why I started contributing on C cluster lifecycle and how that formed. Well, actually, I was there like during the very early formation days of C cluster lifecycle. So trying to improve that area, having had some expertise in like config management and general like sort of deploying complex applications on a set of machines. And I mean, that's something Kubernetes does itself, but for deploying Kubernetes itself, it's still kind of hard. So there is more work to be done in C cluster lifecycle.
Awesome. Good story. Thanks. All right. Next question is about testing. Aaron, you might want to answer this, but anybody can feel free to chime in. If you could get all developers, upstream developers for Kubernetes on the same page with one thing in regards to testing, what would that message be?
That is an extraordinarily loaded question.
What's one thing that you wish everybody knew about testing?
So, well, if we're talking about like values or mission statements here, I always prefer fast and reliable tests that always pass, right? So that means I'm not such a big fan of those who feel like they have to stand up an entire cluster in the real world, subject to real world environmental and network conditions, and the relative humidity and temperature of the day could affect them. And then like their test takes 30 minutes to run and it may or may not produce a meaningful result. Like that's not super useful, but a bunch of unit tests that I can run really quickly will definitely let me know if the business logic makes sense, right? And I think that collectively the project would move a whole lot faster if we were more confident in testing at a more granular, faster level, as opposed to thinking that we needed to test the entire thing as one big black box before we were fully comfortable signing off on new features and whatnot. And this is a great way that I've seen some new contributors add value to the project, is they'll come in and they'll notice an area that hasn't really had great testing coverage and they'll add tests. And like, I am so much happier if you add unit tests. If you add end-to-end tests, that could be a good thing, don't get me wrong. But it also could mean that every single pull request is going to take like 5 minutes longer for its tests to pass. And we're already at the point where like, in order for the project to merge the 40 plus pull requests a day that it does, we have to like test all of them in batches of 5 or 10. Because it takes about an hour or more to run all of the tests for a given pull request. So if we got that time down by writing more unit tests or taking some of the like, I don't know if this exists today. I'm using just off the top of my head, the scheduler, for example, to make sure that the scheduler's logic for its predicates and its filters, right? Given a set of nodes that are configured some certain way, does the scheduler put the pods in the right places at the right times? Like, that's all business logic that doesn't need an entire Kubernetes cluster with an API server and a controller manager and an etcd cluster and virtual machines to test. That's totally doable with the appropriate set of mocks, which will lead me to plug a meeting that is literally happening right now. So SIG testing itself has a sub-project called Testing Commons that we just started up recently. I've been living more in the world of, I will defend to the death your right to write tests, but I'm not going to write them for you. And I'm not going to tell you what correct tests look like, because you're the domain expert. You care more about how the thing operates than I do. I just care that it passes, and hopefully it passes quickly. And so Testing Commons is our sub-project to make sure that we actually provide the frameworks and toolkits to sort of reliably steer people towards well-written tests using the right set of tools. So that would be a great place to show up, which happens like right now on Wednesday at 7:30 Pacific every 2 weeks. So, yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Anybody want to add anything about testing, upstream testing? George?
No, but Aaron kind of mentioned something that I think is worth talking about real quick.
Yeah.
When you're talking about new contributors, also, new people have an eye for things that are obvious that we might not, right? So when we were mentioning, hey, check out the help labels, someone in the chat was like, well, the community section doesn't have a lot of help label stuff labeled. I was like, oh, duh, I should probably go do that. And as I was going through that, I saw one that was like, document better how to set up your laptop for local Kubernetes development, right? And that's a thing where, like, if you ask most people that have been around for a while, they've had that set up for 3 years or something, and they don't think about, how does a new person grab their laptop, start from nothing, right? And we say things like, oh, just go install Docker, go do this, go do this, go do this, but no one's actually sat down and looked at the instructions and gone through them and make sure that they all do the right thing. So I just wanted to mention, because, Aaron was talking about new people writing tests. Just keep in mind too, you have eyeballs that we can't, and it's totally not on purpose, right? Like sometimes there's just swaps. I was like, that looks like it's right. You know what I mean? This beginner section looks like it's right to me. I remember going through that and it was okay, right? Whereas a new person might type in the first command and it might be an error, right? So that's a good place. That's a good place you can help. Just wanted to leave that there.
All right. Well, I think we are actually out of questions for the session. I'm looking at Twitter right now, and I think we're good. Does any contributors on the call have any other questions for contributors on the call? Well, actually, hold on. We just got 2 questions that just flew through Slack. Let's see.
What's the best way to test the changes that you've made? It takes a lot of time to run make every time. So running make every time ends up, if I remember correctly, like doing a full quick release, which runs the unit tests, the integration tests, regenerates all of the API code, builds all of the Linux binaries, and packages them up into a tarball, and I think builds all of the Docker images as well. That sounds like more than what you need if you're just testing a specific piece of code. So generally speaking, you might just want to like run make test or make test integration. If you know the area of code that you have changed, you could probably run make test with the what environment variable equal to the package that you have changed. Now, that's where you're starting to get really clever as a human, right? Because you have some knowledge of the code base. I personally that's sort of what CI is there for, is to run the tests for you. So I personally have no problem just pushing up code that's a work in progress and letting CI sort it out. But like I said, that does take 60 minutes to run, and it runs the whole suite of end-to-end tests, integration tests, and everything. If you have the other plug I'll make, though I don't necessarily recommend this for new contributors, is if you have the wherewithal to run Bazel. Bazel is fantastic as a tool at knowing specifically if I changed this piece of code over in this package here, it means that it needs to rebuild this, this, and this, and test these two things here. And it does that extraordinarily quickly, but it is rather hefty to set up. As for testing in other packages, like it really depends on the state of those other repos outside of the large Kubernetes repo. And so I would make sure that their READMEs and their contributing guides tell you how to do that.
George, did you have something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that Bazel had a new release, and apparently it does remote caching now. So if someone were to document that, how to set that up with Kubernetes as part of a setup, I would be very interested to see how much that helps people in the real world.
Oh, that's a live help wanted issue. You heard it here first.
Yes. Well, I read apparently you could just, if you have extra computers, you could just connect them all up to Bazel and it does some magic thing where super caching happens. But I was reading it, I was like, I wonder how well that really, really works, right?
It's we just turned it on for some of our Canary builds in test infrastructure, and it cut build times at about half. So it's really cool. But like, I would classify Bazel as pro tier. It's really kind of difficult for me as a non-Googler to really grok all of it. It's come a lot further than it has, but it's not what I would recommend for new contributors who are just getting started, because I personally don't know of any other project that uses Bazel as its build system. So it's kind of a onboarding ramp.
All right. Any last questions? All right. Also, for folks listening in, you were in the Slack channel, copied the a deck that I think, did you create that for how to find SIGs and a little bit more of a SIG deep dive? That would be, it's very valuable. So if anybody's listening in and wants that information visually, it's in the Slack channel, #meet our contributors.
So I've got one more pro tip I wanted to throw out there, because I personally find that I've contributed to other open source projects and had my pull requests commented on or acted on really, really quickly. I have found that oftentimes in the Kubernetes project, people can get frustrated or confused as to why there's been little to no interaction or uptake on their pull request when they're used to it happening a lot faster. So I just kind of wanted to illustrate a few things and talk about maybe how we could improve that situation. If that's cool with you, I'm going to share my screen and just do it live. All right. Screen share. Okay, I'm going to go to Kubernetes. I'm going to go to a pull request. I guess I'll go to this one. No, sorry, this is a poor example because it's already been approved. I want to find one that hasn't been approved but does have an LGTM and is a pull request to master. Well, first off, I'll tell you this. If you're in a pull request and you want to get somebody's attention and you use their name, this may be what their notifications page looks like. I mean, I'll grant you, I've been on vacation for a little while, so I have 1,200 open notifications. I'm participating in 422 of these things. I tend to operate on the order of sweeping through these like once a day when I'm actively at work. We also have a tool called Kubernetes, which shows us a pull request dashboard that's a little more informed as to the way things work within Kubernetes. So this looks a lot better for me. But if I were to look at, maybe you've had a pull request, if you're an API machinery, maybe LavaLamp has been involved in your pull request. He has 61 pull requests that require his attention right now, and he's got 84 pull requests that are incoming to him. It might take a little while to get his attention if you're purely using his GitHub username and adding him and expecting him to respond. So a much faster way would be to find somebody other than LavaLamp, or to ping him directly on Slack. So I'm talking, this has nothing to do with me scrolling around. I'm still trying to find a good pull request for the pro tip I've got here. But basically, if you're submitting a pull request and you don't have a lot of action on it, but you do know the SIG that's like interested in this change, I would almost immediately go to that SIG Slack channel and just post the pull request in there and ask somebody to take a look at it. Now, don't be rude about it, right? Like, I'm not sure that I would necessarily spam everything all the time, but if you really haven't gotten any traction on your pull request, it could be that nobody even realizes it's there because we're all super busy working on a bunch of other stuff. So the pro tip I have is this comment here from our CI robot talks about your PR not being approved. And we're working on trying to improve the wording here. But this is essentially supposed to be the checklist of all of the steps that are necessary before your pull request has basically been looked at by all the right humans. So once this says your pull request has been approved, it basically just needs to pass tests. That's not technically correct, but it's close enough. So here you'll notice the bot has recommended that Boe should be the person that you assign the pull request to using this command. And you might assign it to them and ask, like, why aren't they responding? This is ridiculous. I'm blocked on Boe. Come on, somebody help me out here. And I want to introduce you to the concept of owner stalking. For better or for worse, the bot tells you Boe is needed because he lives in this owner's file. And I can actually click on this owner's file. And I can see under the list of approvers that if Boe is really like not responsive, maybe he's on vacation like myself, you could go talk to any of these other people. And then if I really wanted to take it to the next step, I could like go take a look at these people's GitHub profiles and notice that, oh, poor example, I know Merrick probably has been, but maybe G Merrick hasn't been contributing to the Kubernetes project in like 3 months. Maybe he's off working on some other project. He's probably not the person for me to go talk to, but maybe I see that Vish has a really active GitHub profile. And so he's still really involved in Kubernetes. So maybe I could go poke him. And so maybe I would go see if I could find Vish on Slack, or maybe I could try adding Vish. But like I said, adding really high traffic people on GitHub might not do that. But the bot makes a suggestion, but literally the bot's suggestion is a total guess based on these owners files. And you as a human are totally empowered and capable of looking at the owners file and deciding, you know what, I can talk to any of these other people to try and push my pull request forward. That has been my pro tip of the day.
Yeah, I have
just a note from me. I'd also recommend not to start with asking the individuals, but to start working with the entire group. So if you are trying to contribute to some area, for example, as from Aaron's suggestion, it was the contribution to GCE era. It means that you can probably start with working with the SIG GCP Slack channel, asking some people to interact with you. And if you don't have any specific response from none of them, you can reach out to the individual contributors and individual owners.
Yeah, for sure. I will underscore that because I don't want to, like, I use the term owner's file stalking a bit jokingly, but seriously, people don't like to be like nagged out of the blue all the time, right? But I would say, like, go talk to the SIG first, assuming you know who the SIG is. But if you're really confused about who the SIG is, you could maybe ping one of those people, and they might be able to point you in the right direction. Again, don't expect immediate responses. Not all of these people live on Slack all the time. Not all of these people have Slack handles that match up with their GitHub usernames. But it is a good way to remember that there are humans on the other end of this, and some of the humans don't necessarily use GitHub as their sole means of communication.
Yeah, my only tip is Slack and GitHub usernames don't always match. And also on Slack, it's entirely possible for someone to have a similar name. Like, Slack doesn't have unique names, so if you look at someone's name George, and then you look at Slack, there might be 10 Georges. Like, you don't want to accidentally ping the wrong George and stuff. So sometimes in GitHub they'll say like maybe where they work, and then you can kind of figure out what their email address is or something like that. At that point, I just try to revert to mailing. The SIG mailing list is always good because like, I'm only on Slack during work hours, right? But as the project becomes more global, sending a response to the list will get people that are in different time zones, and then maybe you send it at the end of your day, and then when you wake up the next day, you'll have your answer. As opposed to Slack, it feels like you have to ping someone every 10 minutes to see if they're around, and then that gets kind of annoying. So I tend to defer to moving to mailing lists when when it's like, it's kind of been a while. Let me ping that mailing list. So.
And I think these are all great pieces of advice, especially depending on the individual's personality and what they feel comfortable with. I think you touched probably all of those. So I think that's good too. All right, so I think we're going to wrap up today's session. For those watching, if you have future questions, ping us in the Meet Our Contributors channel. We'll try to do this every Wednesday, every first Wednesday of the month. I'd love to do this more. If you're a contributor watching and would like to answer questions or participate in a live code peer review or code walkthrough, please get in contact with us. And I thank all of the contributors on the call for their time, and also, as always, your upstream contributions to this amazing technology. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah. All right. Thanks, George, for the YouTube. All right. Have a good week. Bye.